Today I'm going to make a pumpkin pie. I have made them from scratch a few times with a real pumpkin, and I've cleaned out the pumpkin, boiled it, put it in the blender, but I find that they don't taste any better than the actual cans, and this is just pure pumpkin, so I don't go through any of the trouble to make one from scratch. I do make my own pie crust though. And this pie plate is one of many that my mom gave me many years ago. This is the nicest looking one because my son's girlfriend cleaned it out before she returned it, and I felt like, wow, she really did an awesome job. I never was able to do what she did. So I have a totally different technique in my pie making than most of the pros that I see. I don't use cold chilled butter. I don't chill my dough. I use butter. I've been baking pies for over 40 years. My mom was known in the family for her homemade apple pie. Everyone called them Pearl's apple pie. So I learned from the best. I also had an Aunt Millie who was really good at making pies. So in my family, I come from really good pie makers. So this will be the first pie crust I've made on my channel. So I have a different technique and it works for me because I went through trial and error of, having my pie crust too dry, having it fall apart. I've been through every scenario you can think of. When I was younger, I would get really frustrated when I was young. But now I just kind of whip up the pie crust real fast and they taste good. The difference is that for many years I used shortening, Crisco, and those pie crusts are definitely flakier than the butter crust, but I stopped using shortening probably at least 10 years ago because of the preservatives that they put in it. So I use real butter. It's just pure butter, and they taste really good. So I hope you'll enjoy this pie crust recipe. So the first thing I'm going to do is put everything in a mixer. For many years before there were even dough hooks, I had started using a mixer to do my dough. I found for years I had rings I had to take off. I had dough in my ring. So I discovered that probably 20 years ago, I started using a mixer way before they had a KitchenAid dough hook. So it's just quicker, easier, less messy. So this particular one crust pie crust that I'm making is going to be for a 9.5 inch plate. So I'm doing my one crust for a 10-inch one crust pie recipe. So it's 1 cup, and it's also a third of a cup. So it's 1 1/3 a cup of flour. Now the trick I learned through all these years was a lot of times if I did exactly what they said, it would be really dry and really hard to handle. So what I do is I put a little less than a third of a cup. Like it's probably an inch less, but I will make up for it when I flour my board. I'll put the rest of the flour in then after it's pliable enough to work with. That's why I do that. So also it calls for a 1/2 cup of butter, or whatever you're using, shortening lard, and then 4 tablespoons of water. You could put 3 or 4. I always put the 4th. So now I'm going to go and mix everything together. My mother taught me a trick many years ago regarding putting salt in your pie crust. If you put the amount they ask you to put, which is like a 1/2 teaspoon. I had an aunt who made a pumpkin pie one year, and all you tasted was a salty crust. So my mother taught me not to over salt your baked goods. So what I do is I take a little less than a pinch of salt. It's just a tad bit of salt, because your butter, I use salted butter, already has salt in it. So there are little tricks. There's a lot of technique involved in making a pie. So now we're going to go blend this together. So here's our dough attachment, and like I said, I do pretty much the opposite of what you see online of people using chilled butter. This butter is room temperature. It's much easier to work with, and it works. It all comes together in the end. So here we're blending everything together, the water, butter, flour, and a half a pinch of salt. So here's the end result. This is the dough. Okay, so here's our dough. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make up for the less dough that we added. So it called for 1 1/3 cups of flour. Now we'll add it in now. We'll dust it all, and that way we'll make up for what we didn't put originally. And the whole reason was so we could work with it. It's more pliable. Otherwise, I found that if I add all the flour it asked for, it would dry out. This way it's more pliable to work with. That's what I find. So, like I said, this has been my experience through all the years of baking. So now what you're going to do is just kind of work with your dough a little. First you want to get it in a ball. And make sure you have enough flour. So mainly you just want to make sure you have a nice circle, and then you're going to start rolling. So this is a 9.5 inch pan. So this recipe is for a 10 inch 1 crust pie. So just going to roll this out. So it should be approximately an 1/8 inch thick, not that you're going to be measuring it, but so this is about how it should look. And then what I do is I just do like this. I know there's all kinds of techniques, but this is how I do it. I watched my mom for years making pies. So that's how I do it. I just transfer it over, and now we're ready to crimp it and put it all how it's supposed to be. Now what we're going to do is take our fingers and just kind of go like this around the edge, just like this. And any little tear, it's not a big deal at all. You just kind of mold it back together like that. So then what I do is I take a fork and do this, and then I go around the edges just like this. You might want to put your fork in a little bit of flour, so it just like when you make cookies, you use a fork, you keep it floured when you make peanut butter cookies. Same idea here. So it doesn't stick. You just go all the way around, just like this. So there's the inside of your pie. Now I always have a pretty large crust, but I do it, I'll show you how I do it. I kind of go and trim about this much of it off, so I have that much. If I make more crust than I need, I make little cookies that my mom always did when she had extra dough. I would roll out the extra dough, and I do if I make extra, and just make sugar and cinnamon cookies with it. So here we go. Now what I do is I kind of roll it down just like this. Just kind of take the edges like this and kind of turn them under, just like this. And I do that all the way around the pie before I mold them together, or do my little crust decoration, whatever you want to call it. So this is the super easiest way to make a pie crust, just like I showed you. You put a little less flour so it doesn't get dry. Okay, now it's all turned under. Now this is totally technique, and my mother just used to take her fingers and thumb, and I've done it this way all these years. I know that some people do different things, but I've done it this way all these years, just like my mom. I just go like this and pinch it all the way around. It's just my mom's technique, and I adopted it 40 years ago. So there we go. There's your crust. And now with this particular one, if I was going to do like a cream pie, like a banana cream or something, I would fill this with beans and bake it as it tells you to do a baked pie shell. So otherwise this crust would fall. But this is going to be a pumpkin pie. So now I'm going to make the pumpkin that's going to go in, and it will all bake together. So since I'm making a pumpkin pie, I'm going to show you how I do the pumpkin, which you really can find on this Libby's pumpkin pie can. There are two ways. They now have a new fashioned pumpkin pie, which calls for sweetened condensed milk, which I'm not going to do, and I never have. This will be the famous pumpkin pie on the back label. I have never seen them come out with a different one, but you want to do the standard famous pumpkin pie, which I just noticed. So all the ingredients are on this can, and I'm just going to put them in so you can see how I do this and put it in the pie. So first we're just going to add 1 can of pumpkin, and this is the small can that makes 1 pie. Let me see how many, it's 15 ounces. I have bought the larger can when you want to make 2 pies, but I'm just making 1 because we're not having like a big huge house full. We're going to have a small gathering, and 1 pie with all the other desserts will be just perfect. So you'll add the 1 can of pumpkin, and then you're going to add the ginger, cinnamon, and cloves. So it's 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon of ginger, a 1/4 teaspoon of cloves, and 2 large eggs. So I have all the spices here, and it'll be 3/4 a cup of sugar. It'll be 1 full 12-ounce can of evaporated milk. This is like super easy. You just put everything in a mixing bowl, just mix it together, and you're going to pour it in your pie shell. And then you're going to have 2 large eggs. And now we're going to go mix everything together. So now, after you have all your pumpkin blended together, you just pour it in the pie shell just like this. And it's all going to bake together. So there you have it. I do have a pie crust cover that I purchased a couple of years ago that can prevent the crust from burning. So I'm going to show you that. So like I said, Libby's has a perfect recipe on it. So that's all you have to do is buy a can of Libby's, and it has all the instructions on it for you. So I was at Bed Bath & Beyond a few years ago, and I found this awesome tool for baking. They should have made these years ago. So before I ever found this, I was just putting foil around the edges so they don't burn, and this is called a pie crust shield. So this will prevent the crust from burning or getting too dark. So what you're going to do now is you're going to put this pie in a 425 degree Fahrenheit oven for 15 minutes. And then you're going to turn down the temperature after 15 minutes. You're going to turn it down to 350. And you're going to bake for another 30 or 40 minutes, depending on your oven. After the 30 minutes, you'll put a toothpick in. And if it comes out smoothly, you know it's ready. So this is going to go in the oven now. So this was never meant to be like a pumpkin pie recipe tutorial. It was more like to be a pie crust tutorial. But since I've come this far, I figure I need to have you see what it looks like in the end. So you can see the crust and the pumpkin pie. So I'm going to give it a try. It's delicious. Really, really delicious. So if you want to make a pumpkin pie, Libby's or any of the pumpkin cans are really, really good. To me, there isn't much difference between that and if you made one from scratch from a pumpkin. But Libby's has the recipe that I gave you here, and I'll also have that on the description as well. I'll probably take a picture of the can because then you can get any type of pumpkin you want and you can see it. But the main purpose of this video was to show you how to make a pie crust, so I hope I've done that properly for you. Thank you. So I've decided to make a second pie so I can show you how to make a baked shell pie. Like if you're making a banana cream pie or any kind of cream pie, you'll get like parchment paper and you'll fill it with beans. And I've saved this from other pies I've made so I don't have to waste beans. And what you'll do is you'll just place the parchment paper bag of beans, and you want to have parchment paper in it so it doesn't leak into your pie crust, and then it makes like a mold. So this is what I do. You want to have plenty of beans all the way to the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake this, and what it'll do is it'll just bake the crust itself, and that's what we want. So you place your pie shell in the oven on 475 degree Fahrenheit for 8 to 10 minutes. Okay, so I just took this out of the oven, and you can see where the crust is cooked all the way around. That's how you want it. And that's how it didn't shrink, because you put the beans in. And sometimes there is a little bit of shrinkage. You can't prevent that. But if these beans were not in here, it would have been shrunk way, way down. So I'm going to wait for this to cool, and then I'm going to lift this up and take the beans out. So this is how you make a baked pie crust. So this is our baked pie crust after the dried beans have been removed. So you can see it's all baked just right.